Welcome back to Caught in the Third Act. This is broadcast number 5, and I hope you stick around. I hope you come out and participate and stick around and make something with me and see how things go. Well, in the meantime, until I see you, I've been a little busy. Over the last week, I had a few ideas pop into my head, and most importantly, one of them was what direction this story is kind of going to take. Um, I've had some, I wouldn't quite say epiphanies, but ideas about the interactions and relationships between our protagonist and our antagonist. And it turns out that this is a love story after all, Charlie Brown. Um, it's not going to be your traditional sort of love story. It's definitely going to be a bit different, I think. But essentially, the protagonist and antagonist meet on the internet, as so many people do these days, have no idea about each other's genders or identities or anything else, but ultimately they kind of fall in love. Now, this is not going to be a romance book per se or story per se, but it is at the same time. It's going to be weird. Uh, our villain ultimately has developed an obsessive sort of need to love and want to be loved by our protagonist. So Aoi, Blue Usagi, ultimately is weird. She's a typical Japanese woman, or stereotypical if you want to put it that way. She works from home as a programmer. She more or less keeps to herself. She's very quiet, very shy under ordinary circumstances. And in her day-to-day life, she basically tries to almost be invisible. But somewhere along the line, she meets and falls in love with JT, not knowing that JT is also a woman. And she feels, for the first time, she's something of a sociopath, to be honest. She doesn't like dealing with people. She doesn't like people. They irritate her, and she doesn't really care a whole lot about most people. And that's kind of what surprises her about her feelings with JT and leads her down the obsessive path, more or less. Um, that's where I'm going with that, more or less. And she becomes the antagonist of the story, not entirely by her own choosing, but definitely by her own actions. During their interactions, part of a dialogue clip that popped into my head when I was driving home from a movie last week is more or less this right here. I have no idea where it's going in the story yet, how far in or what, but ultimately, Blue confesses that she loves JT through online interaction, and JT teases by saying, "I know, but what would you do to prove it?" To which Blue responds, "I would bring every country to its knees just to send that message." And JT says, "Then do it." And so Blue does. The key here is that we need a MacGuffin, something to make this happen, something to make this possible. And what I've chosen for that is something that's actually very popular today and maybe a lot more mainstream in 30 years down the road. Basically, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or not, but there's what's called cryptocurrency. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a whole bunch of other digitally created coins that are mined and created by doing certain things online, certain interactions with your computer, or allowing it to use so much processing power to achieve so many tasks. And all of these coins are based on what's called blockchains, which essentially are public records of what information has been sent where. It's encoded in certain means, and it's complicated, a lot more complicated than I want to go into in a broadcast. But needless to say, it's picked up a lot of steam. It's a lot more popular than it used to be just even a couple years ago. And even some countries are getting into the swing of it. Venezuela, for instance, has an official crypto coin for their government, and it's becoming more popular. Japan officially allows it and to be used as a type of currency. It's still kind of trying to gain traction here in the United States, although some businesses here do accept it. There's even been some ATMs here in Chicago that you can theoretically withdraw money from by sending it Bitcoin or something to that effect. I never used one. I don't know the details of those ATMs, but that's kind of where it's going. And 20 or 30 years down the road here, it may very well be that cryptocurrency, or at least a blockchain-based currency, might replace the main currency of a government. The US dollar may no longer be the gold standard, and it hasn't been for a long while, but it's entirely possible that it could go completely crypto down the road. And so our antagonist here has figured out that there's a flaw in the fundamental way of all blockchain standards and coins are utilized and developed. That ultimately there's a way to piggyback some data inside the individual block that gets reassembled when grouped together. And she's figured this out, that it goes all the way back to our current era, the 20 teens, and no one has discovered it until now. She discovered it after 2 years of research, more or less because she was curious. And she's figured out a way to actually take advantage of this and more or less take control of millions of computers, thousands of networks, government, everything. Government, military, private sector, the whole ball of yarn. And do so in such a way that no one even suspects it's there. She's not actively doing anything with it at this point. She's still trying to decide whether she wants to use it maliciously or wants to try to claim a bug bounty, which would probably be a hefty reward for something this fundamental and something this widespread. So she's trying to decide what she wants to do with it. Hasn't sold it off to any bad actors or black hat hackers. She's just sitting on it, even though she's effectively in control of a large number of the world's computers and networks. And when our nice little challenge comes along from JT, it's then that she decides what to do with it. Her obsessive attitude towards how she feels basically pushes her over the edge towards making the world a safer place for the woman she loves, the person that she loves, and ultimately making this a love story. So that's where we're going. I started last week a story called The First Taste. It's up on the website and I'm still working on it. It's far from being done. That more or less dives into who Aoi is. And it's got some interesting things, I think. I encourage you to go and read it. It's an exploration. It's not the final word on who she is and what she's doing and how she's doing it, but it's good, I think, insight for me and hopefully you to see who she is. So from there, 1 second here, also went and did a little more digging on and development on who she probably is. Updated her birth date. I can't remember what I had originally, but I have now set it to July 27, 2032. As this story is taking place at least in the year 2053, that makes her 21. Old enough to know what the hell she's doing. And I think I mentioned, if not here, then at least in my head, that basically hackers over the last 20 years, 25, 26 years, have really gotten to be far more advanced a lot earlier than they did in my age. When I grew up, I was learning to program on my own and learned a hell of a lot, and I can still do a hell of a lot. But Kids these days, not even necessarily teenagers yet, can do far more than I ever did with computers. And I figure that 30 years down the road from now, that's going to be even more true. But part of the reason I changed her birth date, making her, in this case, 21 or so, is because her zodiac sign for that date, July 27th, fits more or less with what I want for her character. And I read up on that information in this book, The Secret Language of Birthdays. I've had a copy of this for 20 years. I highly recommend it if you're writing and want to know what this character is all about. If you know their birth date, you can definitely figure out exactly uh, what kind of traits they're going to exhibit. This book is creepy because it shouldn't be possible, but it tells a lot of truth. Um, if I look at my birth date and read about me, or read about people born on that day, I see a lot of my traits there. And so it's a little eerie to see that I'm not the only one seeing these traits, that I'm not the only one doing these things with that attitude. And it's eye-opening. I highly recommend it if you can find a copy and you just want to even just browse through it to see if your traits match up or line up. And it's insightful. Helps you understand who you are, I think. And that's about that. So I still need to go through and read up on the other characters. In particular, I'm going to have to change JT's birth date. August 8th did not match up with what I envisioned for her, so her birth date will be changing. I haven't picked a year. I figured all along that she was probably going to be younger than Blue. Probably a year or two younger at this point. I don't want to make her any significantly younger than Aoi. But Aoi was always going to be the older of the two, even if there wasn't a relationship between them. As for the other characters, I'm not sure yet. We'll see about them. Now, as for what we're going to do today, I have no idea what we're going to do today. I mainly just wanted to talk about what we were going to do with the antagonist and protagonist. And so I kind of was focusing more on that particular story, the first taste, and did not bother to open that up here so I could work further on it. If you'll give me a moment here, I will do that though. So I hope you had a good week, a good 2 weeks since we last chatted. Mine has been weird. I'm just going to leave it at that. Okay. As I indicated, this is up on the website, so don't worry about reading it right now. And I'll continue to update this until this is complete. At this point, I've gotten as far as beginning the introduction of JT in the story. The first interaction between the two. I imagine that there will be a lot more to them, a lot more interactions before Aoi gets it in her head to do anything about her relationship, how she feels. But until then, we have something to explore. And what led the two to meet is actually an interest in haikus. Haikus are Japanese poems. I'm sure you've probably heard of them. They're 5 syllable. They have a particular format. The first line is 5 syllables, the second line is 7 syllables, the last line, third line, is also 5 syllables. Most of them are about nature in some way, shape, or form, but there are others that don't specifically deal with nature. Um, I'm not a haiku expert in any way, shape, or form. In fact, for the most part, poetry scares the living crap out of me. I don't know enough. I only have one poem that I've ever really liked, and I've just never really been into poetry or writing poetry. I'm very bad at it. It's something that I've wanted to get better at, but hasn't happened yet in my 45 years. Sooner or later, it might. I've been debating for this story about trying to write haikus, to learn how to uh, actually create them and get across the thoughts that I'm trying to express. But to date, I've been disappointed with the ebooks that I've gotten on haikus, and even afraid, more or less, to try to crack open the ebook I got on writing haikus. It's not really my thing, but for those who are into it, it's an amazing thing. I respect it. I respect it as an art form in its own right, separate from just normal poetry, but it's difficult for me. And that's part of the reason why I'm sticking with it in this story. It's not about me. It's about these characters. These characters are into haikus. So I need to engage it for them. And so I will. And I'm going to learn more. I'm going to do a lot of reading in that particular area over the next couple of weeks. I'm actually going to not be lazy and go out and get a book on haikus and try to read a few, try to understand some. I want to open up a discussion in the story. That's more or less how JT and Aoi get to really know each other, about more or less historical and famous haikus. And that is where Aoi comes to see a different world view. JT is more or less kind of outgoing, upbeat. I wouldn't say happy-go-lucky, but she's certainly more happy and open than Aoi feels she is. Aoi, in her own way, feels trapped in her own life. She doesn't like her life as she is, but she lives it because, hey, it's her life. It's all she's ever known. And when she sees how wonderful, essentially, and open that JT is, she wants to be a part of that. And so that's why she changes. That's why she uh, more or less becomes a different person than she starts off being. And she is obsessed with only one person in the world. She doesn't give a damn about anybody else. She's only caring about JT. And that's where we're going here. So, right here at the bottom of this page, or bottom-ish of this page, is JT, or rather, JT is asked a simple question in their forum, which is, where are all the love haiku, or haikus? I'm not sure if it's haikus or haiku as plural. I'll have to look into that. But, like I said, for the most part, haiku are all about nature, and so there's not very many talking about love, lust, sex, people in general, etc. And so she's innocently wondering, where are all the love haiku? And Aoi stumbles across her message and immediately thinks there aren't any. And she was getting ready to go to dinner, or go to the kitchen and make her dinner. But as she sat there, or she started to rise and was thinking about it, she just kind of collapsed back into her own chair. And as she thinks about it, she realizes there are some, but she's not really sure how many there are. And so she sits there longer than she intends, and she opens the message and reads it and really starts to think about it. But eventually, as she started several replies but deleted them, she eventually just gets up and goes, makes dinner, eats, and continues to think about this question. And how to even respond to the question. And that's where we are right now. And I've talked for 20 minutes here without doing a damn thing, so I'm going to get busy here. Excuse me. And in case you're wondering, I made a concerted effort a few years ago to start using Google Drive, and in particular the Documents features. I guess uh, Google Apps more so than Drive, for doing a lot of my writing. It's convenient. I like being able to open just about any of my devices and continue to work on it, whether it's my computer, my cell phone, or my tablet, and just be able to write. I like that feature. The biggest problem, though, is that it lacks a lot of the features that more developed word processors like Microsoft Word have. And so I go back and forth on the two. That's why all of my notes and the character outlines or profiles are done in Microsoft Word at this point, but I'm actually writing the first taste in Google Docs. Again, it's a convenience thing, and ultimately I'll probably convert the whole thing over to being a Microsoft Word document, but at least for the time being, this is indeed going to be written uh, in Docs. Like I said, it's functional, it's powerful, it has a lot of capability, but it's missing a lot of capability too. I should have probably counted and seen how many hot syllables those were. Lingering. That's 3. Doubt and dread. That's more than 5. Let's may as well put this in moderate haiku format. Lingering. Doubt. I think that's roughly 3, 4. Yeah. I'm not going to worry too much about getting this into perfect haiku format. After all, it's something I did just toss together. And it may not even last. I may rip this out later. But for the moment, since it's here, alright, as per usual, I'm going to drop into my little commercial here for a brief break. I'll be back in about a minute. You may make a donation via PayPal at the address shown. You may send Bitcoin to this address. Finally, I am an independent agent for Stream Energy, which offers energy services in 8 states and the District of Columbia, wireless service in 49 states, and a whole host of protective services. Stream offers services that you already use and need. The difference is you'd be buying these as a customer of mine rather than from a faceless corporation. In fact, you too can become an independent agent and become your own boss. For more information and to sign up as a Stream customer or independent agent, visit the address on your screen. Thank you. And we're back. That wasn't too bad, was it? Hope not. A few years ago, uh, several friends of mine and I went to and had been going to a what's called a rally of writers in Lansing, Michigan. It's a get-together of professional and amateur writers to discuss writing and story form and give each other tips and encouragement and support and actually becoming published writers of all sorts of genres and types, etc. One of the more useful workshops that I attended was on form. Basically, we tend to think of writing stories in just your typical format that you see in your average book, like I'm currently doing with The First Taste. This is standard type, standard paragraph form, and it's, well, boring. But what this particular class taught was that you don't have to stick to a particular format or even style of writing to write a story or an interesting story. You can make the story as much a part of an artwork and the format as much a part of artwork as what you're describing. For instance, one of the stories that we were given as an example was in the form of a cookbook. Basically, it listed all these ingredients that were in the story and then gave steps more or less to end up at the from the beginning of the story to the end to describe how it got to this point, which is really interesting. Another one, well, let me see. Another one kind of wrote in a circle all the way around. So the innermost part of it was uh, starting the story in a few words, sentence, and it spiraled outward to actually tell the story. And there are a lot of different formats, and it is important to realize that we don't have to write everything in paragraphs or fragments or even just left to right, up top to bottom, or in depending on where you live, right to left, bottom to top, whatever. We can do whatever we want with the medium, and so we need to do more as writers to take advantage of that, I think. It's important. It's important that we get in touch with our creativity and stay in touch with our creativity. So that's kind of what I'm getting at with the little line here, exactly like this. Basically, this is to indicate that she's reading through a forum, a list of messages, and sees that, hey, there's a message, a particular response, or however many responses to this particular thread, like any typical message board. I probably will convert this into a small one-row table just to divide these up more consistently, but right now I'm just dividing them by tabs. I may actually do a couple of more categories or a couple of more items above and below it, more or less just to show that it is indeed like a list of messages that she's looking for, or looking through. And then I'd probably, to bring focus to it for her and us, for the reader, actually highlight it, something along those lines. Okay, I think that's the longest I've ever been quiet on the stream. But basically what she's doing here is kind of in keeping with what she does as a programmer. Um, when you get a chance to read this story, what you'll see in the first page is that her entire office is covered in paper. And that's because she spent 2 years going through the design of blockchains and the RFCs, the request for comments, printing out the documentation and example data, etc., to come to understand exactly how everything worked. And that's what led her to the discovery of the flaw, of the vulnerability within blockchain design. And that's why ultimately she's paid extremely well for her services, whether she's working for a company, whether she's doing freelance work, or whether she's selling stuff on the black market as a black hat hacker. Typically, she doesn't really care who she sells her work to. She's just curious, more or less, and anxious to get uh, in her hands on code and figure things out. She's a problem solver by nature, as I more or less am when I get down to programming. And so she just looks at everything in excruciating detail to identify what she's after, whether it's a problem, whether it's some better way of doing something, or just to give it time to understand it, whatever it is, and use it better, understand it better. And so what she does both in programming as well as in reading is slowly work her way from the beginning all the way to the end, coming to an understanding of exactly what's being said in whatever it is. She doesn't rush, at least in terms of programming, and she doesn't rush when it comes to enjoying her experiences, her entertainment experiences. Instead, she just takes her time. And that's something to be admired as well, in my opinion. I think we too often rush through everything. And believe it or not, I even think I'm rushing too much in this story. What I'm thinking is I probably need to slow this down considerably. It wasn't my intention to have any interaction with JT within the first couple of pages of the story. And while I'm on page 5 here, it's going too fast. I'm not intending to make this the major story. This is doing backstory for our characters. It's doing character development. This is not technically going to be canon, but it is kind of canon as well. This is not the story that Caught in the Third Act is going to be focused on. It's what comes after this. Although this may be used as a flashback or something within the bigger picture. This could even be the prologue to set things up. But at this point, it's just a touch. It's just an experiment, something for me to get to know a character. And I'll probably do the same thing from JT's side of things. But at least for now, I'm focusing on Aoi. And Aoi, in case you haven't gotten the big picture, means blue in Japanese. Why am I so obsessed with Japanese and using Japanese characters in both this as well as in the other story I was working on in my first 2 broadcasts? Well, I've studied Japanese off and on for more than 30 years. It's a language that I really have a strong fascination with. I like the language, I like the culture. I'm hoping actually to get a job in Japan in the not too distant future. And it's just a part of me. Almost like being an American is a part of me as well. So it's there. It's a thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a different thing. I was asked earlier this week if I can't even remember the right word for it, but essentially what it works out to be is someone who thinks that Japanese culture and language is superior to everything else. It's the best thing ever. And the answer is no. I love Japan, but they're people too. They're no better or worse than us. Yeah, they're just different. Different country, different customs, different language. Language by some standards is completely alien to my native language, English, but it's just different. And so, no, I'm not one of those people. I'm not even sure if I want to dig up the word because personally I saw it kind of as an insult, but it was from a friend, so I didn't take it as an insult. But I can see how someone would get their feelings hurt over being called what the word, whatever the word was, and so I'm not even going to bring it into this broadcast. Nonetheless, it was an interesting question, and I think it was a fair question at the time as well, to be honest. But no, I'm not obsessed with Japan. I don't think it's better. I just think it's different. And since I have some experience and knowledge of the language and culture and the names, and I choose to make certain characters from time to time of that background because I know it and I'm interested in it and I'm fascinated with it. And so I'm going to employ it as much as I employ my own culture and language and everything else, all the little minutiae. And as I learn more, I'll add more. So that's why. But we're coming up on the end of the broadcast here. And what I intend to do over the next couple of weeks here is to either take the first taste as far as I can go with it, which will probably be to Aoi leaving for the United States to try to meet JT, or I'll get started on the other half of this particular story, get to learn who JT is, and see how she interacts with her coworkers and family. That's something that I haven't even touched on with Aoi yet. I haven't mentioned her family. I haven't even really put a lot of thought into her family, although I figure she is an only child. I don't know what happened to her parents at this point, and she, like I said, pretty much keeps to herself, doesn't go out much, and she lives what's called a neat, or is a neat, in what I've seen repeatedly recently in anime. Neat is N-E-E-T. If I remember correctly, it's means not into education, employment, or training. Basically, the person is a shut-in. They don't go outdoors. They don't go outside and interact with people. This is popped up in a few different anime series that I've watched. Let's see. God, what is that? Recovery of an MMO Junkie. Let's see. There's another one that is almost as bad. Actually, is just as bad. I can't think of it either, but it's basically about a brother and sister pair that uh, somehow or another gets sucked into a video game world, and they lived as neats, refusing to go outside or anything else. Somehow or another, they made their living from playing video games. And another interesting one is Arrow Manga Sensei. I love that anime, and I may track down the manga, but it's so twisted and weird and funny. And while it sounds like it should be quite X-rated, it's kinda is in a way, but it isn't in another. And it's twisted but funny, and I can't wait for the next season on that. So that's my anime ranting and raving for the time being. Maybe somebody will give me a kickback on that or sponsorship or something. That would be nice. But in the meantime, I'm going to work on these stories, and I'll always update, as always, update the website with new information as it comes up. And I'm frequently updating the actual PDF for the first taste, so look for the updates as I complete them and post them. And I may update you about this time next week to let you know what the current status of things is, not just to advertise the next broadcast. But in the meantime, I hope you have an excellent 2 weeks. I hope you come back and visit me. Come to the forums, well, as if there are forums. Come to the website, caughtinthethirdact.com. Post comments. Do the same on the YouTube video or the Twitch video. and just let me know what you think. All right? Take it easy, and I will see you soon.